Thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. So a while back I saw this tweet going around asking who would win, 50 Saiyans or 50 Viltrumites. And off the bat this sounds ridiculous, like Goku solos. But it's actually not too crazy of a question when you think about the averages. I feel like not a lot of people have considered how strong an average Saiyan or Viltrumite is. So this is a good opportunity to look at the historical info on how strong both these species are, and not just the strongest outliers. We won't do comic spoilers by the way, but we will cover some of the stats from the Invincible comic. But in terms of plot spoilers, you guys are fine. We'll split this out into two battles. The first fight will be the average Saiyans versus the average Viltrumites. We'll have to do some research and figure out how powerful they are on average and go from there. The second battle is pretty straightforward. The 50 strongest Saiyans and the 50 strongest Viltrumites. Of course, we're not actually going to list off 50 individual Saiyans and Viltrumites, but we're going to just look at the strongest of each species. You know, like Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Mark, Nolan, Thrag, things like that. We'll look at the Saiyans first, and to do this, we'll have to look at Saiyan history for a bit, because what is the average Saiyan actually like? Thankfully, we have a bunch of references for that. As we know, Saiyans were split by class. Most are low class, with a few mid-class and elite Saiyans. Normally, low-class Saiyans are the weakest, but it doesn't automatically mean these guys are nobodies. Since most Saiyans are low-classed, there is a ton of variance. Goku, for example, is simultaneously an example of a really weak low-class warrior and a really strong one. Originally, he was considered pathetic, and even by the time Raditz arrived on Earth, he still was considered pathetic even by low-class standards. Obviously, through hard work, he grew way further, so early Saiyan Saga Goku was one of the weakest examples, but late Saiyan Saga Goku proved that low-class Saiyans don't always have to be weak, they could be far stronger. That was kind of the point of the Saiyan Saga, their class doesn't really dictate their strength. There's also Bardock and his crew, which are pretty powerful, especially Bardock, who is actually one of the strongest Saiyans of his time. So what does this tell us? Low-class Saiyans are typically stronger than early Saiyan Saga Goku, and they were expected to be strong enough to take over planets and destroy them after all. The low-class Saiyans are basically split into two sections. The lower-level warriors like Kakarot or even Guinea who aren't fit for normal combat, or people like Leek, the guy that Paragus and Broly went to Vampa with, who take on other jobs. The low-level, low-class Saiyans are known as infiltration babies when they're kids, sent to other planets to take them over, and typically they die because according to Toriyama, they have a pretty bad survival rate. Or in instances like Guinea, they're just adults who aren't really fit for combat and they just take on other jobs. Because she was actually part of Bardock's crew, but she just sucked at what she did, so she became a butcher. Then there's the upper level of low-class warriors. These are the ones who are more fit for combat and basically right from birth, they're trained to be warriors. These are the people like Bardock's squad and Raditz. By the way, this isn't theories or anything, this is straight from Toriyama's interviews, which is awesome because it gives us a really good starting point right from the author himself. Raditz is actually going to be really useful for this video because we could base a lot of the info on the Saiyans off of him. He is probably a good estimate for what a regular Saiyan's like. He was never anything special, but he's also not weak. It's pretty fair to assume the average low-class warrior is around his strength. And fun fact, he technically has the same rank as Nappa according to Toriyama, but he's still treated by Nappa and Vegeta basically as a normal low-class warrior. Just because he technically has a higher position, he still is low-class at the end of the day. But despite the strength of the Saiyans, one area they weren't really that strong in was cybersecurity. I mean, Frieza was able to spy on them pretty easily after all. But you don't need to be like that. That's where today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN, comes in. The safety of your data is really important, especially in this day and age. It could be a company taking your data for creepy targeted ads, or even individuals looking to sell it off to the highest bidder. Having Surfshark VPN could help protect that data, even if you're on a public network. No matter who might be trying to track you, this is a way to help prevent it. Plus, Surfshark lets you change your location too. In some locations, certain websites might be blocked and this lets you get around that. Not to mention, streaming services will have some shows only available in certain regions, and changing your location with a VPN lets you access that. This is actually pretty common with anime. So instead of paying for more streaming services, just watch your favorite shows on the services you already pay for. If you want to keep yourself protected, or you want to virtually travel to another country, Surfshark's got you covered. Plus, they've got a great offer right now where you can get 4 extra months of Surfshark when you sign up. All you need to do is go to surfshark.com/saladbar or use code SALADBAR at checkout to get your offer. Thanks again to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Anyways, power levels aren't really important in this video since we're comparing it to another verse, but it will of course be a nice frame of reference for how strong the Saiyans are, especially when comparing them to Raditz. He was at a power level of 1500, and this will make it easy for us to scale the average Saiyan. We'll just use his power and the feats he has. Contrary to popular belief, even at this level, he's still going to be planetary. Now, there is a guidebook that stated a power level of 10,000 is needed to destroy a planet, but first of all, it is an external source, and my opinion on guidebooks is that they're not really the best sources because they're usually very contradictory to the series itself. And especially from a scaling standpoint, this doesn't really make any sense, because look at Roshi in the 21st World Tournament. He blew up the moon while having a power of around 139, and a weighted Piccolo with a power of 323 did this casually with no buildup at all. Purely from a power level standpoint, Raditz is nearly 5 times beyond where Piccolo is, and 10 times above where Roshi is. Not to mention, power levels aren't linear, and One of the big things about power levels in the series at this point was the fact that they're unreliable in general, so that whole thing about a 10,000 power level being necessary didn't really stick with me. But anyways, back to the power levels in general too. Since power levels clearly aren't linear, even though Raditz just seems to be a few times above these two people, the difference may be even larger than that. But at the very least, even ignoring power levels, Raditz whipped two casual moonbusters at the same time, Goku and Piccolo. By the way, when Piccolo blew up the moon, he was suppressed and had his weights on. Raditz fought him and Goku at full power, both serious. So this alone pushes Raditz way higher than people think. And to make things even crazier, I don't want to open this can of worms in this video, but there is a really good argument for Dragon Ball's Earth actually being bigger than our normal Earths, and probably Dragon Ball's moon too, so that could change things as well, but I digress. Let's just assume it's the same size as our normal Earth and moon. So we know Raditz is significantly above some casual moonbusters. Plus, the Galactic Patrol has missiles capable of blowing up planets. Not to be confused with the Extinction Bomb, which releases a virus. This is an actual missile that could literally blow up a planet, according to Jocko. And in an interview from Toriyama, he mentioned the Galactic Patrol couldn't do anything against the Saiyans, so they kinda just had to turn a blind eye to them. And in the Jocko manga, he also says that they don't stand a chance against the Saiyans. So considering this is stated a few times, and we know the Galactic Patrol has missiles that could blow up planets, it's a pretty safe assumption that even these missiles won't do anything against Saiyans. And when Jocko brings this up in his manga, he's talking just about Goku, an individual Saiyan. So the strongest weapon of the Galactic Patrol shouldn't be able to take down a Saiyan, which likely means the average Saiyan has planetary durability. And in Dragon Ball, durability and attack power kind of just scale to each other, so that would mean that regular Saiyan is probably planetary. Not to mention all the stuff I just covered with Raditz too. And with how speed scales in Dragon Ball, Raditz is brushing upon light speeds. That same feat of Piccolo blowing up the moon showed him casually launching a beam from the surface to the moon, reflecting that light back within a few seconds. A round trip of light from the moon would take 2.6 seconds, and this was a casual attack from Piccolo no less, while Raditz dodged serious attacks from him which are probably even faster. Light speed seems like a fair estimate for Raditz, maybe even a little above. This also doesn't consider Goku's feat of dodging the solar flare, which I know some people count and some people don't. It's pretty contentious. But since that one opens a can of worms, we'll ignore that and just stick with light speed for Raditz, which I think is at least a fair assumption and says that we reach light speed at this point in the series. Saiyans can also turn Great Ape as long as they have their tails, getting 10 times stronger too. Every stat will get buffed from this. They need a moon to transform, but some Saiyans can create fake moons, and their space pods can project fake moons too. A fake moon would lower the user's power, but only one of them would need to use it. Low-class Saiyans like Turles have displayed this usage of it too, so even though it seems like something more limited to elite warriors like Vegeta, there is a chance that low-class Saiyans could use it. And yes, I know there was that one dub that said Bardock invented the fake moon. Of course that's not really accurate, but I know someone's going to bring it up if I don't. Not to mention, even besides Great Ape, in the heat of battle some Saiyans can grow stronger. We saw this with Bardock against Gas, sort of pushing past his limits as his aura flares up. The average Saiyan might not be pulling this off, much less something like Super Saiyan or anything above that, but it's definitely worth mentioning at least because it could be a possibility. So as a baseline, we could say the average Saiyan is a light speed fighter, with their combat, reaction speeds, and ki blast speeds scaling that high, while their travel speeds are more like super to hypersonic. Great Ape buffs them by 10 times too, and in essence, you could just imagine 50 Raditzes fighting here. He seems to be a pretty average low-class warrior, so we'll assume all the Saiyans in this fight are in that ballpark. Plus, Saiyans are pretty versatile in combat. Being able to use ki is a huge advantage, giving them a wide variety of attacks with much further range than Viltrumites have, who just rely on normal physical power for the most part. Now into the Viltrumites themselves though. This one's a little bit more complicated. The view on how strong the average Viltrumite is can be very skewed. First off, there are less than 50 Viltrumites left at the beginning of Invincible. I'm sure someone in the comments will mention that and argue we should include just the living ones, but it goes the same way for the Saiyans. They only had a handful left and we're just using the historical average, so we're looking at the Viltrumites the same way. Otherwise, we'd also be including people like Goku, Vegeta, etc., the ones who lived after Frieza killed most of them. It's also very important to mention that all the remaining Viltrumites are stated and have been shown to be the strongest, basically survival of the fittest. Thrag, Nolan, Mark, Conquest, etc., etc., they're not akin to the average Viltrumite. The average power of the Viltrumites is skewed because they do cull the weaker ones after all, so that kind of works towards their advantage, but still, it's a bit tough to scale where the average strength lies for those Viltrumites, because we know so little about what the average Viltrumite truly is like. The strength of the remaining ones is not really indicative of how strong they used to be. So in terms of strength, if we're looking at the feats of the living Viltrumites, maybe that way we can establish some sort of ceiling, a certain level where the average ones wouldn't go above. One of the more obvious and impressive feats is obviously the fact that 3 Viltrumites were able to destroy a planet. Now, I want to avoid comic spoilers, so I won't go too in-depth about what happened here, but I also can't pass up this feat. This took 3 of the remaining Viltrumites flying through an already destabilized planet. And remember, we've covered that those remaining Viltrumites are not the average Viltrumites. Actually, you know what? I guess it's not too much of a spoiler to say that 2 of those Viltrumites were Nolan and Mark. Mark and Nolan definitely are average Viltrumites, especially for Mark at this point in the story who's grown so much stronger. And yet, destroying an entire planet took 3 of them, flying through the core of it that's already been destabilized. So we know the average Viltrumite is weaker than this, and probably by a notable margin too, considering these were the last ones who survived. Particularly Nolan, who was already considered one of the stronger people of his species. And I guess we could look into some of the TV show feats too. Since we're using a hypothetical average Viltrumite, we can look at kind of a composite between both the TV series and the comic series. One interesting fact here is that lifting feats for Viltrumites are actually way better than the Saiyans have. Dragon Ball characters have always had really weird lifting feats because, despite the crazy physical strength of the characters in this series, they haven't been able to lift a lot, while Viltrumites have more impressive lifting power in general. You know, things like Nolan diverting a meteor the size of Texas in the TV show, Anissa lifting a cruise ship, Mark lifting 400 tons when he's early on in the story, things like that. Doesn't really matter as much compared to physical strength, but I guess it's worth mentioning because I know someone might bring it up. Speed-wise, Viltrumites are also pretty weird to scale here. It seems like no one could truly agree on how their speed works, but the way I look at it is simply this. Viltrumites can reach really fast speeds, like way beyond light speed, but they need to accelerate to get there still. That's not always instant. Their reactions and perceptions do scale to their travel speed. It's stated as such, and it makes sense to be like that. But it seems like that also isn't constant, weirdly enough. You could easily see this when they fight other characters, because there are multiple times Mark can't dodge other superpowered Earthlings, for example, despite them not being nearly fast enough to stop a Viltrumite. Granted, he does hold back a lot, but you'd still think he'd try and dodge stuff more. And it's not like he's off guard or anything, he just simply can't dodge some stuff, despite being able to move massively faster than light out in space. And this happens to other Viltrumites we see on Earth like Omni-Man, alternate versions Mark, Conquest, etc. There's also feats that work in his favor, but it's pretty inconsistent. Mark has said that he holds back his speed on Earth to not kill people, plus flying on a planet is a lot slower than flying in a vacuum. Though again, there are some other evil Viltrumites that have shown up on Earth that have been attacked by a lot slower people. They wouldn't have had a reason to hold back on Earth. So, even though they can reach really fast speeds, and their combat and reaction speed should scale to those travel speeds as well, it's almost as if those two types of speed need to accelerate alongside their travel speed. With how inconsistent it is, that's really the only way I could think to explain it, but point is, while they can go really fast, massively faster than light even, easily traveling between galaxies and such, they're not instantly going to reach those speeds. They need to build up for it. And when they're not fighting in a vacuum, they are going to be a lot slower. Speaking of the vacuum of space, Viltrumites have the advantage of surviving in space, which could be helpful if they were to destroy the planet or drag the Saiyans into space, but getting too close to a Saiyan and doing this is asking to get your arms ripped off or a point-blank ki blast to the face. Plus, the Saiyans would have strength to counter this in general, even with the Viltrumites lifting more, but basically I think that's not really a factor here. Otherwise, Viltrumites have a lot less things they can immediately use in combat when compared to the average Saiyan. They are pretty much diet Saiyans when you think about it. No transformations, no usage of ki attacks, nothing crazy beyond that. So quick breakdown here, looking at the pros and cons of each. The average Saiyan has a significant strength advantage, and they're much more versatile in terms of abilities, and they could buff themselves during battle with Great Ape. Their biggest downsides are much lower speed, and no space survival, plus the fact that they like to fight people at their strongest, typically not in groups either, which could work against them. Viltrumites have far superior speeds, but granted, they still need to accelerate to reach those speeds, and they could survive in more intense environments. They could also survive in more intense environments and have more experience on average for physical combat. However, they're limited to just physical combat, and on top of that, they aren't as powerful overall. So, now onto Battle 1, 50 average Saiyans versus 50 average Viltrumites. It's clear the Viltrumites have a really apparent speed advantage here. One way this fight could go is if every Viltrumite launches up into space and tries to destroy the planet by flying into it. You wouldn't even need all of them to do that, but probably a good amount considering these are the average Viltrumites, not the strongest. Though I think this is still unlikely because, for one, I don't think they would want to win like this. They are big on glorious victories and honor in their fights, and they'd probably do this as a last resort, but I don't think they'd do it right away. On a similar note, it's kind of like how Saiyans like to fight alone instead of ganging up on someone, so both groups wouldn't take the easy way out in these battles. The other reason destroying the planet is unlikely is because, while they could try it, it's not like the Saiyans will just stand there and let it happen. Sure, with the Viltrumite speeds, they could realistically dodge any attacks from the Saiyans as they descend on the planet, but the Saiyans will essentially be skeet shooting, both when the Viltrumites fly up in the air and then back down. And besides, leaving the atmosphere isn't going to be instant. While they're still affected by the gravity and atmosphere on Earth, even when trying to leave the planet, they might still get tagged by ki blast, considering those are faster than light on their own. As we've discussed, on planets their speeds aren't going to be as high as they are in the vacuum. So not only do I think they wouldn't try this, but I also think it's not a surefire win, or even a good idea in general. Especially if a good chunk of them are killed before the attack lands, they might not be able to accomplish it fully. It's a low probability of happening, and a low probability of succeeding too. Still an option though, and with that out of the way, let's try a regular combat scenario. Saiyans have access to ki, but it's clear they lack proper ki control. Even Vegeta, an elite warrior, couldn't sense ki on his own. However, there's a misinterpretation that this means Saiyans can't really use ki that well. No, that's not true at all. Sure, they're not going to be using ki as well as people like Goku on Earth and having mastery on his level, but the important thing is they still can channel ki and fire it as different types of blast. For one, Saiyans learn to fly when they're very young, and that requires ki at a pretty advanced level in fact. Like, the first time we started seeing that used regularly was when we were after the 22nd World Tournament, getting people like Tien, King Piccolo, and Goku after a lot more training. So that alone shows they have a really good understanding of ki, not to mention the way they could format their attacks. The Saiyans aren't just firing straight laser beams. They can create homing attacks, form them into different types of shapes, form it into circular domes that attack everything around them, things like that. They could even detonate ki remotely. So assuming the Viltrumites were really effective with culling the weak ones, and everyone truly is on the level of the remaining strongest Viltrumites, they would likely win this fight. Though given how little we know about the average historical Viltrumite, and the fact that they're likely not even coming close to the strongest ones that are remaining right now, they're probably going to end up losing to the Saiyans. The speed advantage will only take them so far, especially with them fighting on a planet and not in a vacuum. Not to mention the versatility of the Saiyans, and the power of the average low-class Saiyan being on par with some of the strongest remaining Viltrumites. Maybe not the upper echelon, but still. It won't be an easy victory for the Saiyans either, but I think it is a victory for them. Though the Viltrumites do still have a couple paths to victory, albeit unlikely. As for Battle 2, we don't really need to go too in-depth about this. The 50 strongest Saiyans and the 50 strongest Viltrumites. As for the 50 strongest Viltrumites, we basically take all the survivors since there aren't many left in general. As for the Saiyans, we only have a couple dozen named Saiyans we could use, although a lot are from different canons and different timelines, but none of that really matters because obviously this group of 50 includes heavy hitters like Goku, Vegeta, Broly, Gohan, Trunks, etc. An easy way to cover this fight is simply by looking at it like this. Which Viltrumites are the strongest? Well, end of comic Mark, Thrag, Nolan, people like them. That is the peak of the Viltrumite's power, and frankly, even one of the really strong Saiyans is more than enough to deal with them. I don't need to tell you Goku can take this alone. While the average Saiyan isn't crazy strong, the strongest of the Saiyans are crazy strong. Any living battle-ready Saiyan is honestly overkill. Keyword battle-ready, not people like Bra or Pan, though I guess even Pan is kind of a challenge for some of them. Jokes aside, even people like Goten and present Trunks would be overkill, especially when you take Dragon Ball Super scaling into account, because a lot of these characters are universe busters at minimum. It's not worth going in depth for because it's such a slaughter that it's not even funny. And it doesn't even consider the non-canon Saiyans like the Super Dragon Ball Heroes characters who make the canon characters look like babies in comparison. The ones in canon aren't the strongest Saiyans. The strongest Saiyans would be characters like Capsule Corp Goku, Jump Force Goku, Zeno Goku, actually just a lot of Gokus and Vegetas. Either way, whether it's Saiyans from Daima, GT, Super, Z movies, video games, whatever, the strongest Saiyans are winning this fight really easily. But let me know what you think below. And like always, I know it's a scaling video, so be civil in the comments. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. And once more, thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video.